Shakespeare's famous As You Like It says, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. The same can be said of politics. It's election season, and that means the incumbents and challengers are pounding the pavement with one goal in mind: the majority vote. Hello and welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. With an economy struggling to rebound after a year-long shutdown, the threat of another surge in COVID cases, and global uncertainty, whomever wins the election will have some enormous challenges. And let's face it, challenges and governance go hand in hand. Tonight on The Record, we discuss the intricacies of politics with those who know it best. My guests include sitting members of Parliament, some who are not offering for the next election and some taking a new political course. Stay tuned. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory. We take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV Cable Channel 212 and streaming live on Facebook on the R News Bahamas page. Welcome back to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer, and tonight we're discussing the intricacies of politics. He's known to be one of the most controversial, outspoken MPs within the Free National Movement, and just recently it was announced that he would not be receiving the renomination from the party that he currently represents. When asked why he is now deciding to run as an independent, he made it known that his membership to the Free National Movement is now null and void.
I didn't file for this divorce. This divorce was filed for by the Honorable Dr. Hubert Minnis. He is now going to sign. His nomination last night was the signing of the decree nisi. So he determined that this marriage is over.
McAlpine's announcement comes one day after the F&M ratified Wellborn Boodle as the party's candidate for the Pineridge constituency in the next general election. McAlpine says while he had other options, he decided to run as an independent candidate after prayerful consideration.
Well, my guest tonight is certainly no stranger to the world of politics, and definitely none to us here on the Record. I'd like to welcome back to our show tonight the Member of Parliament for Pineridge, Frederick McAlpine. Sir, welcome to the show again. Let's start out by taking us to the night that you found out you were not being nominated. What was that experience like for you? Was it something you were expecting? Did it take you by surprise? Tell us exactly what was that like for you?
Well, it did not take me by surprise, and I was, quite frankly, expecting to get the outcome that came, which was that they would be ratifying another individual for the seat. I really wasn't sitting around twiddling my thumbs waiting for a nomination. I just wanted the party, or rather the leadership, disguised as the party, to do what they wanted to do, which was to get me out. And I was aware of it. And I've been making preparations to do what I'm now doing, which is to run as an independent.
It is no secret that you and the F&M and even Prime Minister Minnis have been at odds for a while. You've been very outspoken and very critical. many of your critics have said, why didn't you just leave the party before now? Why wait for this outcome?
Well, so it's strategic politically. Had I left the party, I would have perhaps become silent. The media would not have carried me the way they carried me. You guys have been able to carry me because I was a part of the Free National Movement. Secondly, I wanted to be inside, stating and showing the world and the country that I was fighting within, trying to make it right. Had the FNM been listening to me and paying attention to some of the things that I was saying, perhaps they would not be in the quagmire they are now in politically.
When you say quagmire, what do you see as some of the greatest issues facing that party now as they clearly head into the elections?
Leadership. Leadership, leadership, leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership. The promises that have not been fulfilled. The Freedom of Information Act did not get teeth put into it. The VAT, the increase of VAT, after you said that it was a lazy tax and that you were so much against it. The fact that you had the debacle with OBAN, the many scandalous, the fact that you've been blacklisted on many occasions, so many things that you've been saying and did not fulfill, the election date. Today we have people in this country running around with their heads cut off. And then when you give us this transfer, it is so tacky that I had to transfer the other day, and they write on my purple card, which I love the color purple, by the way. You write on my purple card in Reading, and this is what you want me to use as a national identification? Come on, man. This is where we are. We've gone from bad to worse. Nobody's complaining about the fact that you had Dorian to deal with and you had COVID-19. We recognize that there would be economic fallout from these crises. But what we did not appreciate is their management of these crises, their management, their performance. And so, yes, they are between a rock and a hard place with the Bahamian people.
You decided, and you've announced your intention to run as an independent. Why as an independent? Why not join the opposition or one of the other existing parties?
Not at this time. Perhaps maybe sometime down the road. I don't know what the Lord will do. I intend to win Pineridge. When I win Pineridge, I will discuss with the people of Grand Bahama, or the people of Grand Bahama, and particularly the people of Pineridge, and by extension Grand Bahama, as to what they would have me do. Suppose this is a 67, where the stone the builder has rejected becomes the head cornerstone, and I have to decide who's the government. That's one way to look at it. The other side way of looking at it is there could be such a shellacking for the Free National Movement that even though I get in, the FNM, they call me back home because there would probably be hardly anybody, if anybody, there left to fight as an opposition.
So I've got to ask you, have you had discussions with the opposition parties? Because there is more than one party. You said not at this time. So that tells me that you've left the door open. Your options are still open.
My door, yes, it is, especially after I would have won. My options are open, and let me indicate that every political party, third force, and the official opposition have all reached out to me. But I know Grand Bahama, and Grand Bahama would prefer me to stand alone at this time. I keep telling the country, when the whole country was PLP, Grand Bahama was FNM. Now, the demographics have changed. People have a different mindset, but there's a lot of disappointment in the Free National Movement, particularly when it comes to Grand Bahama and Abaco, the two islands that have always been strong supporters of the Free National Movement. And the only time that the people would vote PLP in Grand Bahama is when they don't have an option. Pineridge now has an option. And
that brings up a very important point, sir. You would have, and historically you're right, Grand Bahama has been a bastion of FNM support. On occasions they have had a few PLP seats, but even in those instances have held some seats for Grand Bahama, but have never elected an independent. If I'm wrong, I stand to be corrected. Why do you think you have a shot this time at winning as an independent when traditionally you're in an island, in an area that will either go FNM or PLP, but no real history of ever supporting an independent?
The reason why I feel very comfortable is because history would also say, Mr. Sawyer, that Grand Bahama's never had such a strong voice in Pine Ridge or Grand Bahama as it has had in Frederick McAlpine. That's number one. Number two, there are many FNMs who are mad with the Free National Movement in Pine Ridge and are prepared to stick with me. And secondly, there are many people who are not excited with the leader of the opposition and say, you know what, I'm sticking with Mac, because even if the PLP wins, they see McAlpine as the one who will hold and have the testicular fortitude to hold the government feet to the fire, who is coming or who's not coming.
You mentioned that there are people who are not excited. You mentioned there are people who are not excited with the leader of the PLP. We've spoken in depth about the FNM and the issues that you've had with that party, but that is a narrative that's being pushed as well about the PLP, that people may not be excited about Mr. Davis as leader. What is your take?
My take is, at this stage of the game, nobody's voting for the PLP. People, we are voting against the FNM. This is about the leadership of Dr. Hubert Minnis. He has so aggravated the Bahamian people. And it's unfortunate that he's had people around him who have told him, or I guess were paid to mislead him, that he is so favorable with the Bahamian people. So it's not that anybody's voting to put Mr. Davis in. He's going to get in because at the end of the day, people want Mr. Minnis out. That's the long and short end of the story.
So we could find ourselves in an instance of history repeating itself, because many would say in 2017 that people voted out then Prime Minister Christie and the PLP and voted in a Hubert Minnis who they weren't too excited about as leader. Do we run the risk now of having history repeat itself, where people vote out a particular party or vote out a particular leader? And again, this is very hypothetical. I just want to put it out there. Do we run the risk of history repeating itself if we keep voting, if the country keeps voting people out?
Yes, and I think it's unfortunate, but I think that's what's going to happen. Listen, whether we want to accept it or not, people were mad with Mr. Christie. Mr. Christie and Mr. Ingram, who you can touch, feel, and see the things they've done, were voted out. We have borrowed billions of dollars and can't touch, see, and feel nothing. So tell me why you think, if you couldn't keep a person like Mr. Christie and Mr. Ingram in, how are you going to keep Mr. Minnis in? Yes, Jerome, I believe history is going to repeat itself as it did in 2017, but I think it might be worse.
And, you know, their FNM supporters and within the party will challenge you to say there are some things that the party would have done again. I'm not here to defend the FNM. I just want to make that clear. But, you know, as we get into the election season, we're going to have these discussions. So you're telling me that the party that you sat in really did nothing in the 4+ years that they've been in?
I would not say that. I would not say that. They have done some things. And anyone who would believe they've not done things, the question is, have they done enough to warrant to be reelected back as government? Yes, in every government, the worst of government, well, some people say this is the worst of government, but every government from the days of the UBP until now has done something. Yes, but was it enough to warrant being reelected? Nobody's disputing the fact that the FNM hasn't done some things. Shucks, the PLP did some things under Christie too. And that beat goes on and on and on. It's not just the things they've done, it's what they didn't do and how they treated people in the process. When you let your citizens feel less than Bahamian, less than people, you have an issue.
If we could, I want to ask something. We've got to go to a break after this. If we took Dr. Hubert Minnis out of the mix going into the election, what do you think the sentiment would be for the FNM at that point?
That has been a discussion. That has been an ongoing discussion. They probably won't get beat as bad. That probably would be the answer. But that has been the issue from day one. Now, it's a little bit too late for that. Bringing in somebody else at this time would be a bit too late. There is this consensus nationally that there is a shellacking coming. I mean, let's just take a look at this Monday pastoral. The Prime Minister has been saying for a very long time, go register, go register. The leader of the opposition says, look, he make all this thing on Tuesday, him and the speaker. And people go rushing in this COVID-19 environment, taking that written, get registered. Was that for the government? Or was that again?
Mr. Frederick McAlpine, sir, we're going to take a break. When we return, we'll pick up where we left off with this conversation. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere. We've got more on the record right after this. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory. We take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV Cable Channel 212 and streaming live on Facebook on the R News Bahamas page. Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Tonight we are discussing the intricacies of politics. But before we continue on with our current guest, we extended an invitation to the outgoing Member of Parliament for South Andros, Picewell Forbes, in the interest of bringing a fair and balanced show. He agreed, but declined at the last minute. This is the third time we've invited Mr. Forbes on the show. Again, I just wanted to put it out there for the sake of balance. We invited someone from the opposition, but 3 times the charm, Mr. Forbes. Sir, Mr. McAlpine, thank you for continuing with us. You, in the last segment, really spoke to what you said could have been done better by the F&M government. You have said previously that the government has sold dreams and schemes and have mimicked Donald Trump, and that the government has been whining. Why do you feel that they have been whining, and why have you compared this government to that of the Trump administration?
Somehow they seem to have a lot in common. It seems if you support this leadership, as was the case in the North, you can have whatever you want to have in terms of being promoted and elevated and doing whatever you want to do in this country. Once you kiss the ring of Dr. Minnis, and you bowed down, you were promoted or you were exalted. If you confronted him and tell him what was truth, and he did not want to hear the truth, then he dismissed you. He put you aside and he ignored you. And he basically devalued you in worth, in spirit, in intellect, and ability. And that's just how things were operating to the North. So if you bowed down and you worshiped, you were elevated. If you were straightforward, honest, plain speaking, and spoke the truth, you basically had no way of advancing. A number of things also were said by the present leadership that was not fulfilled. People they don't trust Dr. Minnis. His word is not considered his bound in the Bahamian society. So you telling us that, election isn't until 2022, and then you're going to turn around and still, no doubt, have an early election. That's your norm. You don't believe in taxes and bad is a lazy tax, and then you get in and you turn around and increase it by 60%. That's a norm. Your word is not your bound. So nothing you tell the Bahamian society, we take it at face value.
Well, I've got to ask you this. We were, as a public and as a media, when it came to the resignations of Dr. Dwayne Sands and even K. Peter Turnquest, we were given, reasons that they had done something that went against Westminster system, etc. But from where you sat, was there more going on? Because there was always a separate story running as to why these two gentlemen are no longer sitting in the cabinet.
Yeah, there's always a separate story. I mean, the thing with what surprises me with K. Peter Cheng was, I'm not trying to get in these people's affair, but this was going on before he was elected and nominated and became deputy leader. So what was the reason again? I guess he just wanted him out. And notice, we had a prime minister who said, oh, I don't want no position in cabinet. I just want to be CEO. And then when the minister of finance is gone, he takes on that portfolio. But when he dismissed the minister of health, he who is a doctor refused to take on the ministry of health, which the country would have gladly understood him doing. More things change, the more they remain the same.
Interesting. Let's talk about the next general election. You seem to think elections are pretty imminent, as all signs are there that we are moving towards the election. Who do you think is poised to win this election? You would have mentioned it in the last segment that you think the FNM is going to be voted out. But if you could give us, look in your crystal ball, whatever, give us some predictions on, where do you think the greatest losses will come if it goes that way? Or what could even be a big challenge for the PLP? Because I wonder whether any election is a walk in the park.
No, any election is not a walk in the park. I mean, again, let me be clear. When it comes to the Bahamian politics, there is a political leadership deficit presently. People are not excited about Dr. Minnis. They're not excited about Brave Davis. However, the irony for Dr. Minnis is people do not vote government in. They vote them out in the Bahamas. We've not voted a government in this country since 1997. It's the last time we voted a government in. Since then, we've been voting government in and out, which is also a sign that people are frustrated with the two political dinosaurs. And to be quite honest with you, Jerome, if there was a viable third force, both parties would probably be gone.
Would you be willing and open to a viable third force, to a coalition, to a grouping? Because there are lots of groups out there, and you're right, viable is the key word, because I don't see the momentum for the third parties that I saw maybe 2 elections ago. And of course, I could be wrong, but would you be open and be a part of some kind of coalition if we got to that point?
If we got to that point, yes, I would be. The question is, again, you have people. And one thing I'm learning about Bahamian politics, they like their member of parliament in the House. You've had these third parties that have approached people and have approached me. People who are leading who've never been in the Senate, never been in the parliament. And yet, what? You have to bring together a group of people. And in each of these groupings, you got to be able to see the government. Who's going to be a prime minister? Who's going to be a deputy? Who's going to be a minister of finance? Who's going to be a tourism minister? Who's going to deal with health? Who's going to deal with education? Who's going to deal with security? When you're putting a government together, these are the things that you need to think about, not after, before. So while you're compiling a team, that's what you should be looking at in the compilation of your team. Not just, hey, you come run with me. We can be the next government. And then what? Viable is the word.
Sir, I have to ask you this. Are there others like yourself within the FNM and even within the PLP who may be bold enough to make that move and say, you know what, we're breaking away from the dinosaurs as you described them?
It may happen. It may happen in the next term around. The Bahamian, one thing is happening, and I think you know this perhaps better than me, Jerome, from where you sit as a professional journalist. The demographics is changing politically.
Very quickly, yes.
Mindset is different. They're far more educated and far more persons at least completing high school level. And their views are different. And then we have a lot of tertiary persons. So the views are different. And so I think we're getting there. We're not there yet, but we are now beyond the embryonic stage of this. I think we're now past the embryonic and zygote. I think the Bahamas is now pregnant with political change futuristically.
I try to always engage millennials and Gen Y, X, Y, Z. There's so many acronyms nowadays. But I always try to engage and get an understanding from that segment. I mean, we know specifically within the last election, it really was first-time voters who helped to carry, carry you all as a party really over the edge and gave you that significant win. When you talk to that segment, where are they in terms of voting, in terms of loyalty, in terms of even interest? Because sometimes I worry that we're going to have great voter apathy amongst that group because, as you say, I don't see the excitement on either side.
No, there's no excitement on either side. And millennials and the XYZ generation tend to buck the system. I'll give you an example, Jerome. I called for a mobilization meeting of my crew called the MACPAC. 72 persons showed up. There were people from PLPs, FNMs, DNAs, independent persuasion, just wanting to see to it that I get reelected in Pine Ridge.
So help us on I've never been on a campaign trail. So is 72 a significant number?
It's very significant. That's trying to get the team together that's going to help you campaign and man your polling stations. There are 13 polling divisions in Pine Ridge. And so I need at least 6 persons to man each polling division, which is approximately, I think, 70-something. And I am telling you that I personally already have 84 persons in the backpack, but for the first initiated meeting, we had 72. So yes, that's good. That's excellent. And what I'm trying to say to you is there are persons out there who are not excited about either party, but want to make a statement. I have been the strongest voice for Grand Bahama and Pine Ridge for the last 25 plus years. They don't want to lose their voice. And again, I say, if the FNM's coming back or the PLP's coming back, you want a voice like Frederick McAlpine still in the House of Parliament. My
final question, sir, has to do with campaign finance. You're not being backed by a established political party, and you're not being backed by the weight and even the finances of those parties. And elections are expensive things. How are you raising money to be able to pull off this campaign?
There are some people who just want to see to it that the PLP nor the FNM wins in Pine Ridge. And they're helping me to ensure that that does not happen. And so I'm thankful to some generous friends and donors who are supporting me to ensure that I be reelected as the Member of Parliament for Pine Ridge, to which I thank you.
Reverend Frederick McAlpine, the incumbent Member of Parliament for Pine Ridge and soon-to-be independent candidate, thank you for coming on. We wish you all the best. We'll be keeping an eye on your campaign as we move into the election season. And as always, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us. I'm going to say that you've got an open invitation. We'll be talking to you, I'm sure, a lot more as we head into this election season. Best of luck to you, sir.
Thank you for having me, Jerome. And again, you're doing an excellent job. And may God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you very much, sir. Well, when we come back from the break, we're going to have the Member of Parliament for Fort Charlotte, Mark Humes. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back right after this. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits. Venture into unknown territory. We take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV Cable Channel 212 and streaming live on Facebook on the R News Bahamas page. Welcome back to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Tonight, we're discussing the intricacies of politics with the people who know it best. In April of this year, the Free National Movement added to their ratification 3 more candidates. Of this number was the ratification of their Fort Charlotte prospective, Dramico Archer. But that left the incumbent member of Parliament with no path to re-election. He said at the time he was unceremoniously dumped by the party when another member was nominated as a candidate for Fort Charlotte. Although often quiet in the House, at the time he made it known that he did not appreciate the disrespect. Well, joining me tonight is the current member of Parliament for Fort Charlotte, who called on the Prime Minister to show him some respect. I'm happy to welcome Mark Humes to On the Record. Mark, welcome back to the show. This isn't your first time, but it's been a while. In 2017, you won your seat for Fort Charlotte with 2,152 votes, while on the other hand, the PLP challenger Alfred Sears got 1,616 votes. What do you believe separated you all from, at that point, what was it that you think that gave you the winning edge?
Well, again, thank you very much, Jerome, for having me with you tonight. As it relates to the question, I think at the time there were several different factors that came into play in the lead up to the 2017 election. I think there was great dissatisfaction with the Progressive Liberal Party at the time and the leadership of the Progressive Liberal Party. The F&M had proposed something new, and I think people were excited about the prospect. So that was one factor, it was that wave factor. There were several other factors. One, I'm from Fort Charlotte. I grew up in the area, and there were many persons across the spectrum, political divide, that knew me, grew up with me, and, sort of gave me their support. So I think those were the 2 key factors. One, the dissatisfaction with the Progressive Liberal Party, and public's support for the F&M, and then also the support from the community where I live and where I grew up. I think those were 2 of the major factors in the 2017 win.
Now, as an MP, and I know you and I have talked about this privately, what were some of the major challenges you had with just trying to be there in that constituency and just trying to do some of the basic things that constituents require?
Well, I think there are so many needs across the community, and these are needs that, have compounded over the years. I think when I came in, the needs were so great, and so immediate. It was so pressing and immediate that there were some, I guess you would say, there were expectations. There were some unrealistic expectations of, what the Member of Parliament is supposed to do, what the Member of Parliament can do, and the likes, And I don't know if that's because of previous years, where the members of Parliament sort of make themselves out to be gods, and at the snap of a finger, things can get done. So I think there was that immediate expectation that, I would be able to do the same things. We tried to temper person's expectations. That was pretty difficult. And then when and then at the same time, there were things that I had promised when I was campaigning, understanding the dynamics of communities, having watched several years in the dynamics of politics. I tried to make sure that whatever plan I was putting together for the community when I was campaigning, that I sort of put together a plan that, was realistic based on my capabilities. And I think, what I found out was that once elected, even though I had promised that I was going to do certain things, there were expectations of me and what I would do outside of the things that I had promised. And I think that's where there was a conflict in things happening in the community. But overall, I think we did a tremendous job in the community, and the things that we did in the community during a short time basically only had a 2-year period, because everything after 2019-20 was a complete wash, and it was just everything was just about social assistance at the time. Activities went out and it just became about social assistance.
So I've got to ask, did you want to run again?
Yeah, I think everybody, once you've done it, you're an incumbent and you do want to, I'm not a quitter. I'm a former athlete. I'm a coach. And, if you're going to get out of the game, the best way is to be beat out of the game. But I don't think you should be pulled out of the game before you get a chance to defend. So yeah, it was the expectation that, I would have defended and give the community a chance either to re-employ you as their member of parliament or to discontinue their contract with you. But I think that should have been a community decision and not just the decision of a few individuals.
So help me to understand a few things relative to that. Was there ever a discussion between you and the party as to why you weren't being renominated? If so, what were the reasons given?
There was never any outright discussion. Most of the discussions that took place with any of the party members was always an after the fact discussion. But I think during the whole process, I kept my eyes open on what was taking place, leading up to that point. So I was very aware of things that were taking place behind the scenes. But most people that know me know that I'm not a very emotional type person. I don't get upset easy at certain situations. And the party has and like I said to them, the party has a right based on some aspects of its constitution. The party has a right to make a decision in its best interest, what they perceive to be their best interest. So understanding that they have that right, I didn't think it was, it was my duty to sort of, make a fuss.
I mean, were you called into a meeting and then they say, hey, Mark, we're not going forward with you because X, Y, and Z?
No, there was never any meeting held. Like I said, whatever meetings took place was typically after the fact.
So what, you got a phone call to say, hey, we're not running you? I mean, what happened?
No.
Nothing?
Like I said, I don't want to get into all those details, but there were conversations after the fact. There were calls after the fact. There were discussions that I had with the certain executives of the party after the fact, after things were already taken place, and I call them to say, listen, I understand that this has taken place, and all you guys have to do is just be upfront with me. I don't know how people may perceive me. I know the general perception is that if you tell somebody some bad news or something they may not like, and I watch it, because people expected me to carry on in a particular way because I didn't receive the nomination. That's a general expectation from the public. But again, I don't know if people have watched my demeanor over the past 4 years and my character, gotten to know my character. But, I believe in men sitting down and discussing matters. I don't believe in public displays of vitriol and the likes. I don't think men do that. I don't think leaders do that. And so, my thing was I would have that discussion with those persons that I needed to have those discussions with, not through the media or anything else, but I did have discussions with the party after the fact, just to say, listen, all you have to do is come to me, sit down and say, this is what we're going to do. And once I understood that, again, it would have been no big deal. God has given me a lot of gifts and talents that have gotten me this far. And I don't think he's going to leave me with all the blessings that he's bestowed on me moving forward. And so it was just a simple, like you said, having a conversation with me. And I give relationship advice. And
right.
One of the advice that I give when you see you have persons that are in these relationships and they're breaking up. And I always say, if someone says to you that they don't want to be with you, there's no need. Once they've said it to you, once they've shown it to you, there's no need to fight somebody to be with
Move
you.
on.
Just move on. It's simple as that.
Mark, if that is indeed the road that you took, I congratulate you for how you handled it. My late grandmother used to say there is dignity in everything. And so I applaud you. I want to reference an event of June 2nd. Prime Minister Minnis made reference to Dromiko Archer, who is the ratified candidate as the next MP for Fort Charlotte. You then responded and said that you felt disrespected. Take us to that moment and what that was like for you. And certainly, what was it that really brought you to your feet to say, hey, I'm not going to accept this?
Yeah, the disrespect wasn't anything to do with Mr. Archer, because if people would remember, Mr. Archer had been ratified, I think, almost a month prior to that.
Right.
And I had not said anything about it. And like I said, I don't want anybody to perceive that, what I said when I said it in the House had anything to do with Mr. Archer or Mr. Archer receiving the nomination. Like I said, if I wanted to make a scene about it, or if I wanted to have something to say about it, I would have said it prior to Mr. Archer being nominated, because, again, I knew it was taking place, or subsequent to his being nominated. I think what happened in the House that day was the fact that, the discussion was being held, and the PM was talking about, Prime Minister was talking about, what he was doing for the Junkanoo community. And the first time when he had mentioned Mr. Archer's name, I really didn't think much about it, because, again, I understood he was, being exuberant at that time. He was in the moment at that time presenting his proposal. And so, the first time that he had mentioned the conversation that he had with Mr. Archer, it was fine. I just smiled it away as PM being exuberant. He and I did exchange eye contact when he did it, and I saw that if you look at the presentation, his presentation shifted. I thought he understood what the eye contact meant. And so after, he had continued on, and then he came back to have that same discussion again. And I think it was at that point, again, PM and I understand each other, but I think it was at that point, I just have to say, just to be mindful. That was all. And I think some people saw it as a request for respect. But sometimes you can say to somebody, you can demand something from somebody by saying please. We're taught to say please. And by saying please, if I say please, watch yourself, or, show me something, that's a command as well in the English language. That can be a command as well. And so I was just saying, just to tone it down a little bit. I don't mind. You guys have made the decision. You have Mr. Archer, he's campaigning. That's fine. For me, I'm just trying to sort of move on to the next chapter of my life as quietly as I possibly can. I came into this pretty quiet. I'm trying to move on as quietly as I possibly can. But it just seems as if people want to pull me into the political entertainment. And I had promised myself that coming into politics, I wasn't going to be a part of the entertainment for anybody. I came in here to do a work. I'm very serious. I think most people can let you know I'm extremely serious about anything that any opportunity I take on. I take it very seriously. I'm not very good at politics. I don't like, politics has us where we are today. And I've always said, if we're going to change the way things are done, we have to do away with the politics. I understand everything that's taking place out there, but we have to do away with the politics. And I'm not much of a politics individual. I just believe in doing what is right and working. So,
Good response. Mark Humes, we've got a few more questions for you, but we're going to have to take one final break. To our audience, don't go anywhere. Our discussion continues right after this.
Thank you.
Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. This is our final segment. We're discussing the intricacies of politics. My guest for the segment continues to be the Member of Parliament for Fort Charlotte, Mr. Mark Humes. Mark, this has been a very different term for this party, even for the country. You all, as a government and as a party, have had to deal with two major disasters, one being Dorian, the other being the COVID-19 global crisis. But what do you think you and your party could have done differently and done better within this term?
I think the party did as best as it could, given the circumstances. And I go back to I think it was 2018. If we look at the economy and the way the country was going on 2019 prior to Dorian, you would recognize, again, we were on a great recovery. The tourism numbers were up. We were breaking records. The debt was coming down. People were, the job numbers were coming down. So we were on a tremendous track. When Dorian came, I can tell you, I think people only think that Dorian impacted those persons in Abaco that were directly, and in Grand Bahama that were directly in the storm. And it did have a major impact on them. I know right now I'm housing I have an 89-year-old lady from Abaco who came up in the storm, didn't have any family members, was in the shelter. And I, formed a relationship with her. She's now living with me.
Wow. Commendable.
Yeah, she's now living. Well, is the best we could. They wanted to put her in an old age home, and I wasn't going to allow that to happen. So she's living with me. So it was traumatic, and I see what she goes through anytime the rain starts. She starts to have sort of some relapses. But it was a traumatic experience for all of us. I think it was a gut blow when Dorian came, and you had to recover from that. And I think the government did a tremendous job in recovering from Dorian. But then 6 months later, COVID came, and we can say, hindsight, we can look at what was done and see how to improve. But when you're going through that storm, per se, not just Dorian, but also COVID, and you're being asked to respond to situations as they occur. It's very little you can do. I think and it's not just what I think, but there are many reports in the international community about the job that this administration has done in handling not just COVID and not just Dorian, but just handling this whole crisis. So, hindsight, you can look back and say, perhaps we could have done a better job anticipating the pandemic arriving in the Bahamas, in essence, giving us an ability to prepare even more. We could have done that differently. Perhaps when cases started to arise, confining people versus having them go home to quarantine, that could have been something that could have mitigated some of the situations. But I think this government did a tremendous job. And when you look at, all they did in the social welfare section as well, I can't do anything but commend this government and what it's done throughout. I know many people would not like to hear that, but I think in the circumstances and having to do it for the first time, having to go through it for the first time, I think the government did an incredible job staying focused. That's the main thing.
What specifically, though, do you think could have been done better? Because, despite what you say, there's still a lot of discontentment out there with the party. And as I spoke to in my previous segments with my previous guests, there are people out there who have a lot of issues with the Prime Minister. What do you think could have been done better?
Communication. In all of this, everything at the end of the day boils down to communication. I think our communication, our marketing, our public relations on this from the start could have been a lot better. But again, at the end of the day, Jerome, which you are and what the Prime Minister and every other member of government is depending on is for people to adhere to whatever protocols or measures that are being put in place to mitigate against the spread. And there's nothing that you can do to help this situation if the people are not helping you. The Prime Minister, I heard some of the comments, but a dictator would have locked this place down completely, despite the cries of individuals saying that we need to do this or we need to have this open. The dictator would have said, no, shut it down. So at the end of the day, I think what has to happen is there has to be a hand-in-hand relationship with what the government is doing or asking people to do in order to assist, and people and the general public's willingness to assist as well, assist the government. It has to be a partnership. It cannot just be government saying that we need you guys to do these things to assist, and then the public is not doing what they must do to assist as well.
It would appear from your responses that even though the party is not offering you for a candidate, as a candidate again, you seem to be very much still in support of the FNM. Is that correct to assume?
I am. Again, I have to be able to separate whatever the emotional aspect of how I may feel about a particular thing and look at what is. I'm an English professor. And one of the things I teach my students is when you're looking at a situation and you're trying to be objective, the first thing you have to do is remove your emotions out of it. And not because I'm not receiving a nomination doesn't mean that I don't believe in what the party has done for the most part and that it has done a good job and that it is the best organization to lead the country forward. Again, I'm going to leave that up to the general public to make that decision. But when I look at the work that's been done, yes, every administration can do things differently or better. As the chairman of BASA, I could do things, I'm sure in hindsight, I could have done things differently and better. Chairman of Independence, every year we do those things. And once it's done, you look back and see what you could have done better or differently. Yes, we could have. But at the end of the day, I think the way we've managed this crisis and all of the crises, we've done a tremendous job. So I'm not because I'm not receiving a nomination, I'm now going to sort of turn on the party. No, I think we did. I was a part of that. And I think we did an excellent job with what we had and the likes. And again, it's a partnership. Now, what happened to my nomination is a different story. And so, but I'm not going to let that cloud, my objective observance of what's taking place in the country.
Mark, I really have to tell you, it's to see you, take this position and have this disposition, it's really admirable because a lot of times I think we just allow emotions to lead us into everything. And so it's refreshing to have, this kind of conversation as well. Although, emotions help to make for good theater sometimes as well. So
they do. And
I won't discount that completely. But my question at this point, though, is what do you think the FNM's chances are at re-election at this point?
I think the FNM's chances are very good. I think it may not be the same margins that we had coming into 2017.
What makes you think that?
Well, the greatest disadvantage, at the end of the day, elections, and I said this to my party, elections boil down to leaders. How the country feels about a particular leader. Forget the team. We look at the team, but most times people look at who is the leader. And like I've said to colleagues, in 2017, we try to compare what happened in 2017 to what's taking place now. The difference was Perry Christie was a tried leader for several decades. He had been on the scene for several decades. He had led for 2 terms. People were very, very familiar with Mr. Christie. Dr. Minnis, on the other hand, even though he had been in frontline politics, had not led. So people would have probably been a little bit more willing to give him an opportunity to lead. This coming into this general election, we have 2 candidates that are now tried. You have Dr. Minnis, who has led the Free National Movement for the last 4 years, and then you have Brave Davis, who's been around for several decades in frontline politics as well. They both have track records now. People are going to look at whose track record they probably can trust more. Again, this is going to be a matter of trust. And as nice of an individual as Mr. Davis is, people are going to look at some of the complexities of his track record. And I don't think the general view is that Mr. Davis is a strong enough leader, a sure enough leader at this time.
But are you concerned, though, sir, that people will vote out the FNM as they have done in previous elections? I mean, as my guest would have pointed out in the last segment, we've not had a consecutive government since 1997. People vote out government when they're annoyed about things.
I think people vote out leaders, for the most part. It was either Ingram, when they were voting, they were either upset with Ingram, they were either upset with Christie.
And you don't think they're upset with Dr. Minnis, sir?
They are, but I think most people, like you said, people are going to reflect and look at what he had to deal with in his term. No other prime minister, no other prime minister in the history of this independent country has had to deal with what Dr. Minnis has had to deal with. And I think, again, under that tremendous pressure, he was able to stay focused. And so when you look at the 2 types of leadership, at the end of the day, you see most of the persons are going to, again, determine what it is that they're going to do based on who the leader is. And I think most people are going to have, despite the way they may feel about Dr. Minnis, probably going to have more confidence that he can continue to lead us forward, to progress us forward in the next administration, more so than, say, Mr. Davis. There are some concerns about Mr. Davis's leadership that many have as well, even within his own party. And so I don't think this is, unusual. Again, it's going to be about turnout. Yes, there's dissatisfaction with the leader of the Free National Movement, but how are the FNMs going to turn out? Will they, the FNMs have a tendency when they're not satisfied with their leadership, they stay home. That's a
very valid point, and that does happen, yes.
Yes, and so it's going to be about how Dr. Minnis is able to excite his base and still maintain the confidence of some of those Progressive Liberal Party individuals that came over. And then again, it's going to be, how the PLPs are always excited to get out there and vote, and how many of them are going to return home after the 2017 election. How many of them are going to return home, and how many of them are going to get out and support their
and
party.
let us not forget those first-time voters, those millennials and Gen XYZ, who really have no allegiance or loyalty to any party or political system. So it's going to be very interesting on election night.
I like to see what those numbers are, because I think a lot of the new voters are dissatisfied in general, so they may not turn out as much.
So Mark, unfortunately, we're out of time. They're yelling in my ear. I've got to go. But I have to tell you, sir, you may have a career when all of this over as a political commentator. You gave a lot of good insight today, and we appreciate that. You're always well-spoken. Best of luck to you with whatever you do after this is all over. I know you'll be around, and we'll be in contact. Who knows? We may bring you on the show to give us some commentary in the future from time to time. Thank you so very much. All the best to you.
Sure. Thank you very much, sir. Have a good night.
You too, sir. That's going to do it for this week's episode of On the Record. I want to thank all of my guests for taking time to be with us, and of course to my technical and production crew for making it all possible, and of course to you, our audience. Special thanks for watching. We couldn't do it without you. We'll see you again next week, same place, same time, right here on The Record.